A starving German shepherd stood in the snow with a dented tin bowl in his mouth. He did not bark for help. He simply scratched at a Navy SEAL's truck door. Callum Rourke had no food to give him, only a little warmth and a choice. Then he saw the old collar, and the name of a dead brother came back from the storm. Before the night was over, that wounded dog would force Callum to stop seconds before an avalanche swallowed the road ahead. But Morrow had not come only to be rescued, he had come carrying the truth a whole town had buried. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Callum Rourke had learned long ago that silence was not empty. Silence had weight. It had corners. It had old voices folded inside it, like letters never opened. That was why he kept moving. At 52, Callum no longer belonged to the Navy, though some habits still lived in his bones like winter in old timber. He worked now wherever harsh weather and failing machinery needed a steady hand. Emergency towers, remote warning stations, rescue beacons, weather-battered relays tucked into places most people only saw on maps. It was not glory. It was not even much of a life, if measured by photographs on a mantel or someone waiting with dinner. But it was useful. And useful was a word Callum still trusted. That afternoon, he had finished repairing the emergency communication system at an old ranger station in Silver Pine Basin, Montana. The station sat high above a frozen drainage valley, half buried among firs and white-barked aspens, its roof carrying a thick burden of snow. Beyond it, the mountains rose in pale ridges, beautiful in the cruel way. Winter mountains could be beautiful, like saints who had forgotten mercy. The sky had been bright when he arrived. By the time he packed his tools, the brightness had turned thin and metallic. Snow moved across the trees in restless sheets. The wind combed through the pines and made them whisper together like old men discussing a verdict. Callum looked once toward the west, where the clouds were folding down over the ridge, and decided he had waited long enough. He wore his usual field layers, an olive-drab combat shirt fitted close through the chest, camouflage sleeves banded with darker horizontal strips at the biceps, charcoal tactical pants, weathered brown snow boots, and a forest green jacket half-zipped against the cold. Silver showed at his temples beneath his dark, side-parted hair. His face, handsome in a hard American way, carried a faint break along the bridge of his nose and the gray-blue eyes of a man who noticed exits before he noticed decorations. He loaded the last coil of cable into the back of his charcoal Ford Bronco. Then he climbed in, shut the door, and sat for one breath longer than necessary. The cab smelled of cold vinyl, machine oil, old coffee, and snowmelt. On the passenger seat lay a folded paper map, a flare kit, and a pair of work gloves, stiff with frost. No phone signal, no traffic, no reason to linger. Callum turned the key halfway. Then came the sound. Scratch. Not loud, not dramatic, just a dry, weak scrape against the passenger door. Callum paused. A branch, maybe. Some ice breaking loose from the mirror. Scratch. Slower this time. Then again, scratch. Something in the rhythm made his hand leave the key. Callum turned his head. At first he saw only a blur of black and gold through the snow-streaked window. Then the shape rose higher, unsteady, and two front paws pressed against the side of the Bronco. A German shepherd stood outside his truck on its hind legs. No, not stood. Tried to stand. The dog was large beneath the ruin of hunger, but starvation had narrowed him. Snow clung to his black and tan coat in dirty clumps. His ribs showed faintly under wet fur. One ear held upright. The other, torn at the edge in a small V-shaped notch, flickered weakly in the wind. Old wounds marked his legs. Newer scratches crossed his shoulders. His muzzle was graying too early, silver at the chin and around the mouth. And in that mouth, gripped carefully between worn teeth, was a dented tin bowl. The bowl trembled as the dog trembled. It knocked softly against the door, tin against metal, a beggar's bell. Callum did not move for several seconds. He had seen men beg. He had seen animals suffer. He had seen pride survive in places where flesh had no right to keep standing. But there was something about that bowl, held with such solemn desperation, that went through him cleaner than pity. The dog was not whining. He was not performing hunger. He was presenting evidence. Callum opened the door slowly. The dog dropped back to all fours at once and stumbled away, head low, shoulders tight, bowl still in his mouth. His amber eyes fixed on Callum's hands first, then his boots, then his face. He had the look of an animal that had been hit for coming too close, starved for staying too far, and blamed simply for being difficult to love. "Easy," Callum said. His voice sounded rough in the blowing snow. The dog did not run. That mattered. Callum stepped down from the Bronco and kept his hands visible. Snow hissed across the road and gathered along the windshield wipers. The cold bit through the seam of his glove as he crouched beside the open door. "You picked a bad day to go door to door," he murmured. The dog blinked once. It was not amusement. Dogs did not need jokes the way humans did. But Callum had always believed a man should say something ordinary when standing before suffering. Grand words made pain suspicious. He checked his pockets. Nothing. No jerky, no protein bar, no sandwich forgotten from morning. He opened the center console. A flashlight, tape, a folding knife, a cracked packet of mints, hard enough to be classified as ammunition. "Of course," he muttered. "One day I don't pack food." The dog lowered the bowl into the snow and nudged it forward with his nose. That small movement almost broke something in Callum. Not because it was pathetic, because it was disciplined. The dog had asked before. Many times, perhaps. He knew the ritual. Approach. Show bowl. Wait. Hope. Brace for rejection. Callum looked toward the ranger station. Empty. Locked. No supplies beyond tools and weather equipment. He pulled out his phone anyway. No bars. The storm had swallowed the signal. The temperature was falling. The dog would not make it through the night. That should have been enough. But then the wind turned, lifting the fur along the dog's neck, and Callum saw the collar. Dark brown leather, cracked, weather split. Too old to be decorative, too well made to be random. A metal tag hung beneath the throat, dulled nearly gray. Callum leaned closer. The dog stiffened, but did not retreat. "I'm not taking it," Callum said quietly. "Just looking." He turned the tag with 2 fingers. Most of the lettering had been scratched, but one word remained. Morrow. Callum's breath caught. The mountain wind moved around him, and for a moment the cold road dissolved into another place. Dust instead of snow, heat shimmering above stone, a younger man laughing under his breath while a black and tan shepherd sat beside him like royalty. Elias Vance. Callum saw him as clearly as if grief had opened a door. Elias had been lean, quiet, almost gentle until something was wrong. Then he became immovable. He had owned neither loud speeches nor heroic poses, only a stubborn sense of duty that made lesser men uncomfortable. His K9 had been named Morrow, a sharp, intelligent shepherd with amber eyes and a habit of watching Elias's left hand for commands before anyone else knew an order had been given. Callum turned the tag farther. Inside the metal, nearly hidden beneath grime and wear, were tiny engraved marks. E. V. M17. The old operational code. Callum stopped breathing for half a second. The dog watched him, not hopefully now, closely, as if waiting to see whether the name meant anything. As if the animal had dragged that last scrap of identity through hunger and snow and human cruelty for this exact test. "Morrow?" Callum said. The dog's torn ear twitched. No leap, no joyful bark, no miracle softened for easy hearts. Only that twitch, only a small tremor under the ribs. Only a sound buried deep in the chest, too tired to be a whine and too old to be fear. Callum felt his throat tighten. Elias had called him 3 times after they both left the service. More than 3. If Callum counted the messages he had seen and not answered quickly enough, there had always been work. Weather, bad reception, the convenient cowardice of being busy. One message had stayed in his phone for months before he deleted it. "Call me when you can. Something up here doesn't sit right." Callum had called too late. Elias never answered. The official story had been an accident somewhere near Granite Hollow. Snow movement, poor judgment, bad luck. Callum had accepted the report the way tired men accept sealed doors. He had told himself Elias knew mountains, yes, but mountains killed skilled men every winter. He had told himself grief did not entitle him to suspicion. Now Elias's dog stood in front of him, half-starved, holding a beggar's bowl. The world, Callum thought, had a cruel sense of timing. Morrow swayed. Callum stood and opened the rear passenger door. He took his spare jacket from the back seat and spread it across the floorboard. "All right," he said. "I don't have food. I don't have signal. I don't have a plan worth bragging about." The dog stared at the open door. "But I've got heat," Callum said. "And I've got a way down the mountain." The storm thickened between them. Morrow looked from Callum to the truck, then down at the bowl. Very carefully, as though surrendering a weapon, he picked it up and stepped forward. His first attempt failed. His back legs trembled. He nearly slipped. Callum did not grab him. He wanted to. Every instinct told him to lift the animal before weakness dragged him down. But Morrow was watching, measuring. A dog that had survived betrayal did not always read help as kindness. So Callum waited. "Take your time." Morrow tried again. This time he climbed into the Bronco. He placed the bowl on the floor first, then lowered himself onto the jacket with a slow, controlled collapse. His body curled around the dented metal as if it were the last possession he trusted. Callum shut the door gently. By the time he returned to the driver's seat, snow had begun to cover his boot prints. He started the Bronco and turned the heater high. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the engine, the fan, the wind, and the harsh rhythm of Morrow breathing behind him. Callum drove. The road out of Silver Pine Basin narrowed as it curved toward Widow's Cut, a steep pass where the mountain rose on one side and fell away into white timber on the other. In clear weather, it was beautiful. In weather like this, beauty became a liar with clean hands. Callum kept both hands on the wheel. The tires rolled over packed snow. The Bronco's headlights cut tunnels through the storm. Behind him, Morrow lay silent, too silent. Callum glanced in the mirror. The dog's eyes were open, not resting, listening. "Morrow," Callum said, testing the name again. The dog did not move. Then his head lifted, slowly at first. His ears angled forward. Callum looked back to the road. Nothing but snow, trees, the pale bend ahead. Then Morrow lurched upright. It cost him. Callum heard the scrape of claws against the rubber floor mat, heard the tin bowl slide and strike the seat bracket. The dog gave a broken sound, low and urgent. "Morrow, down!" The dog ignored him. A front paw hit Callum's right shoulder. Not strong enough to shove, but desperate enough to jolt his arm. "Morrow." The dog barked. One sharp, cracked blast. Then he clawed at Callum's sleeve. Callum heard it then, not through the wind, under it, a faint, spreading crack, like ice, remembering it was water. His foot hit the brake. The Bronco skidded, corrected, shuddered to a stop. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the mountain moved. A white slab broke loose from the slope above the bend ahead. Snow, rock, and shattered branches thundered down across the road with a force that shook the windshield. The avalanche slammed into the pass less than 50 feet in front of the Bronco, swallowing the curve where Callum would have been. The sound filled the world. Then it ended. Snow dust rolled over the hood like smoke from a battlefield. Callum sat motionless, both hands locked on the wheel. His heart hammered once, twice. Behind him, Morrow collapsed. Callum turned off the engine without knowing why, and twisted in his seat. The dog lay on the jacket, chest heaving, eyes half closed, body shaking from the effort. Not magic. Not fate dressed in fur. A trained dog had heard what a tired man had dismissed. A starving K9, half broken and carrying a bowl like a monk's last cup, had spent the last of his strength to stop the truck. Callum reached back slowly. This time Morrow did not flinch. Callum's hand rested on the dog's shoulder. Under the wet fur he felt bone, muscle, tremor, life. "You just saved my life," he said. Morrow's amber eye opened a little. Outside, the blocked road steamed in the cold. Snow continued falling as if nothing remarkable had happened, as if the mountain had not just tried to close one story and been interrupted by a dog too stubborn to let another man disappear. Callum looked at the old collar. Morrow. E.V. M17. He thought of Elias's unanswered calls, the message he had erased, the report he had accepted, the years he had allowed silence to sit beside him and call itself peace. The dog had not come to him clean. He had not come proud. He had come starving, wounded, ugly with survival, bowl in his mouth, and truth buried somewhere behind his tired eyes. Callum started the Bronco again and eased the truck into a slow turn, away from the buried pass and toward the lower service road. He did not yet know what had happened to Elias Vance. He did not yet know why Morrow had been left to wander hungry through a bright and merciless winter. But as the headlights swept across the falling snow, Callum understood one thing with a certainty that felt almost like judgment. The dead had found a way to knock on his door, and this time he would answer. Callum Rourke's house stood above Larkwater Lake, as if it had been built by someone who wanted to be near beauty, but not too near people. It was a small cedar cabin with a narrow porch, 2 front windows, a stone chimney, and a roof burdened with snow. The lake beyond it lay frozen under the evening light, pale blue where the wind had polished the ice, white where new snow had settled. Pines crowded the slope behind the house, their branches heavy and still, like old guards who had forgotten the name of the king they served. Callum parked the Bronco near the woodpile and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Behind him, Morrow did not move. The dog was awake. Callum could feel it without turning. There was a different kind of silence in the truck now. Not the silence of an empty cab, but the silence of another living thing, deciding whether the world had earned one more inch of trust. "All right," Callum said quietly. "This is it." He got out first. The cold hit him clean across the face. Snow whispered over the hood of the Bronco and gathered in the seams of his forest green jacket. Callum opened the rear door slowly. Morrow lifted his head from the spare jacket. The dented tin bowl sat beneath his front paws, pinned there as if someone might steal even that. Callum did not reach for him. He left the door open and walked to the cabin. The porch boards creaked under his boots. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and turned on one lamp near the stove. Warm amber light filled the front room. It showed the plain furniture, the stacked firewood, the rescue maps on the wall, the radio equipment on a side table, and the second armchair he rarely used. He built the fire first, not because he was cold, because work gave his hands permission not to shake. When the stove caught, he filled a bowl with warm water and set it near the entryway. Then he opened the pantry and found 2 cans of meat stew, the kind he kept for storms and bad moods. Too much seasoning for a dog, probably, but hunger was not a creature that accepted perfect solutions. He rinsed what he could, separated small pieces of meat, and placed them on a plate. Only then did he return to the open door. Morrow had climbed out of the truck by himself. He stood in the yard, snow gathering along his back, the tin bowl at his feet. His body trembled, but his head remained high. The torn V at the edge of his left ear gave him a battered, almost ancient dignity, like a banner that had survived too many winters to care whether anyone saluted. "Come on," Callum said. Morrow looked at the cabin, then at Callum, then at the open land behind him. For 1 second, Callum thought the dog would run. He did not. Morrow picked up the bowl and came forward. At the threshold, he stopped. Callum stepped aside, giving him the whole doorway. He knew better than to crowd a working dog, and better still than to crowd a wounded one. Trust with an animal like this was not a bridge. It was a frozen lake. You crossed it slowly, listening for cracks. Morrow placed one paw inside, then the other. His eyes moved over everything. The stove, the chair, the windows, the dark hallway, Callum's boots, Callum's hands. He did not sniff like a pet exploring a new room. He scanned like a tired sentry checking for threat. When he saw the water, his throat worked. Still, he did not rush. He set the tin bowl down near the door, walked to the water, and drank in small, controlled pulls. The restraint was worse to watch than panic would have been. Panic belonged to creatures who still believed the world might respond. Morrow drank like one who had learned that taking too much at once could cost him everything. Callum lowered himself to the floor several feet away. "Food's there when you want it." Morrow's eyes flicked to the plate. His body leaned toward it before his pride allowed his feet to move. At last, he ate, slowly at first. Then, with small failures of control, he swallowed, paused, looked at Callum, swallowed again. Once, a piece of meat slipped from the plate to the floor. Morrow froze over it, waiting for punishment. Callum looked toward the stove as if he had not noticed. After a long moment, Morrow picked it up. The fire clicked softly. Wind moved under the eaves. Somewhere out on the lake, ice gave a distant groan, deep and mournful, like a giant turning in sleep. When the plate was empty, Morrow backed away from it, returned to the tin bowl, and lay down with his chin resting against the dented rim. Callum watched him for a while. There were wounds he could see, the scratches, the raw places near the collar, the thinness at the ribs, the uneven tremor in the right foreleg. Then there were the wounds that made a dog wait to be struck over a fallen scrap of food. Those were harder. Callum got up and fetched a clean towel, a basin of warm water, antiseptic, and gauze from the emergency kit. He sat near Morrow, not too close. "I need to clean that leg," he said. Morrow did not move. Callum reached slowly toward the front paw. A low growl rose from the dog. Not loud, not theatrical. A warning made of exhaustion. Callum stopped. "All right." The growl faded. For a moment, they sat like that. One man with a towel in his hand, one dog with war still standing between them. Callum set the towel down. "You keep your secrets tonight," he said. "I've kept enough of mine." Morrow blinked. It was not forgiveness. But it was not refusal either. That night, Callum slept badly in the chair beside the stove, boots still on, jacket over his chest. He woke 3 times. Each time, Morrow was awake. The dog never moved from the doorway. He positioned himself between Callum and the outside world, even half-starved, even in a house he did not yet trust. At dawn, pale light crept across the frozen lake. Morrow was finally asleep, one paw touching the tin bowl. Callum stood quietly, made coffee, and called Dr. Nora Bellamy as soon as the signal returned. Nora's clinic sat 20 miles south in a town so small the post office shared a wall with a bait shop. The sign outside read Bellamy Veterinary and Field Care, though most locals simply called it Nora's Place, as if the clinic, the woman, and the moral authority over all injured animals in the county were one and the same. Nora Bellamy opened the back door before Callum knocked. She was in her mid-50s, small, sharp-boned, with silver hair cut close around her head and narrow glasses perched low on her nose. Her white veterinary coat was already stained at one cuff, and a black stethoscope with a strip of silver tape on the tube hung around her neck. She looked at Callum first, then passed him into the Bronco. "That him?" "That's him." "Name?" Callum hesitated. "Morrow." Nora looked back at him. Something in her face shifted, but only slightly. Nora did not waste expressions. She saved them for animals, the way some people saved good china for guests. "Bring him in slow." Morrow did not like the clinic. The smells hit him first. Disinfectant, old fear, wet fur, medicine, other dogs, metal tables wiped too clean. His body stiffened beside Callum, and when a kennel door clanged somewhere in the back, he lowered his head and let out a sound like thunder trapped under ice. Nora did not flinch. "Handsome wreck," she said softly, not to Callum, but to the dog. "You look like you've been arguing with the whole world and losing on points." Morrow's eyes shifted to her. Nora crouched sideways, not face to face, and held out one hand low. No baby talk, no foolish cheer, just presence. To Callum's surprise, Morrow sniffed her fingers. "Good," Nora murmured. "You still believe in evidence." The examination took nearly an hour. Nora worked with the patience of someone who had spent half her life persuading pain to loosen its teeth. She cleaned the infected scratches. She checked the torn ear, the old scar near the right foreleg, the raw groove beneath the collar, and the bruising hidden under wet fur. She gave him fluids slowly, a measured feeding plan, antibiotics, and a warning look for Callum when he asked whether Morrow would recover. Body? Maybe. Spirit? "Don't ask me to put a date on that." "He was trained," Callum said. Nora did not look up from wrapping the foreleg. "I noticed. Older K9. Maybe 8 or 9. 8 or 9, yes. Teeth say hard use. Muscles say working dog. Reactions say someone taught him discipline. Then someone else taught him fear." Callum absorbed that, in silence. Nora's scanner beeped when she passed it near Morrow's shoulder. She frowned. "What?" "Chip." "That's good. Not if the registry comes up hollow." She checked the clinic computer, typed, waited, typed again. Outside, snow slid from the roof in a soft collapse. Morrow lay on the padded mat, eyes open, watching Callum more than Nora now. Finally, Nora leaned back. "Well," she said, "that's interesting in the kind of way that usually means someone has been lying." Callum crossed the room. The screen showed an identification number, but no active owner record. No transfer history. No rescue note. No death entry. The civilian registry had been scrubbed down to a ghost of itself. "A dog like this doesn't just fall out of a system," Nora said. "Not cleanly." Callum looked at Morrow. The dog's tail did not move. His amber eyes held steady, as if he had already known bureaucracy would fail him and was waiting for the humans to catch up. Callum reached into his jacket and took out the old collar tag, now wiped clean enough to read. Nora took it. "Morrow," she said. Then she saw the inner mark, EVM17. The room changed in a way no machine could measure. Nora's mouth tightened. "You know that code?" "I know the man it belonged to." "Elias Vance," she said. Callum looked at her sharply. Nora removed her glasses and cleaned them with the edge of her coat, though they were not dirty. "I heard about him. Granite Hollow. Henderson Ridge accident. 3 winters ago, give or take. Official report said he misread the slope." Nora put her glasses back on. Official reports are like canned soup. Convenient, shelf-stable, and often full of things nobody should swallow too quickly. Despite himself, Callum almost smiled. Almost. "You didn't believe it?" "I don't believe or disbelieve things I can't examine," she said. "But I remember the chatter. Dangerous weather, private contractor, dead safety consultant, missing dog." Then, a few months later, warnings started floating around about a black and tan shepherd near Granite Hollow. Aggressive, diseased, don't approach, call local authorities. Morrow lifted his head at the word authorities. "Not much, just enough," Nora noticed. "So," she said more quietly, "somebody made sure people would be afraid to help him." Callum felt the old cold move through him again. Not the cold outside, the other kind. The kind that entered when events began arranging themselves into intention. He thought of the tin bowl. How many doors had Morrow scratched before his paws found the Bronco? How many people had turned away because a town had been told to fear him? Nora touched the dog's wrapped paw gently. "He needs rest. Small meals. No hard travel for a couple days if you can help it." Callum said nothing. Nora looked at him over the rims of her glasses. "That was not permission to go start a war with a mining company." "I didn't say mining company." "You didn't have to. Your face did." Callum glanced away. Nora sighed. "Men like you always think silence makes you mysterious. Mostly it just makes veterinarians tired." Morrow gave one faint breath through his nose. It was not a laugh, but it came close enough that Callum looked at him. For the first time since the ranger station, the dog's eyes seemed less like closed doors and more like windows with something moving behind them. Callum brought Morrow home and did what Nora ordered, which irritated him only because she was right. Small meals, warm water, antibiotics hidden badly in meat, rest, no unnecessary handling. Let the dog choose distance. Over the next 3 days, Larkwater Cabin changed. Not dramatically. Nothing in Callum's life ever changed with trumpets, but the house began to acquire signs of another heartbeat. A towel near the stove, a water bowl by the back door, paw marks drying on the floorboards. The dented tin bowl placed wherever Morrow decided it belonged that hour, near the entry, by the stove, under the table, once directly in front of Callum's boots, as if offered for inspection by some weary little court. Morrow recovered by inches. He tolerated Callum cleaning the foreleg. Then he allowed it. On the 4th morning, he leaned a fraction of his weight into Callum's hand before catching himself and pulling away, embarrassed by his own need. Callum pretended not to notice. That was how trust grew between proud creatures. One afternoon, a logging truck passed on the far road across the lake and sounded its reverse alarm. 3 beeps carried over the ice. Morrow snapped upright. His body went rigid, his ears shot forward. His breathing stopped so completely that Callum, standing at the sink, turned at once. Another beep. Morrow backed into the corner beside the stove, eyes fixed on nothing Callum could see. Morrow. The dog did not hear him. He was somewhere else. Some road, some metal sound, some orange-vested figure in a white storm. Callum crossed the room slowly and crouched halfway, not reaching. Morrow, you're here. The dog's gaze flicked toward him, then away. Callum took the tin bowl from beside the door and slid it gently across the floor. It bumped Morrow's front paw with a soft, metallic tap. The sound was small, familiar, present. Morrow lowered his head and touched the rim with his nose. His breath came back. Callum stayed where he was, one knee on the floor, the two of them connected by a dented bowl no sane man would have called sacred. Yet in that moment, it became more than a begging dish. It became proof that Morrow had survived long enough to bring his hunger somewhere it could be seen. That night, Callum opened a steel box he kept under the bed. Inside were old documents, a service knife, a folded flag from a ceremony he barely remembered, and photographs he almost never touched. He found the one he wanted near the bottom. 3 men in dust-colored gear stood beside a transport helicopter under a sun-bleached sky. One of them was Callum, younger and harder around the mouth. One was Elias Vance, lean, tired, smiling like he had just found something funny in the middle of misery. Beside Elias sat a younger Morrow, broad-chested, black and tan, ears high, eyes bright with purpose. Callum sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Elias for a long time. The last message returned to him with cruel precision. "Call me when you can. Something up here doesn't sit right." He had been in Idaho then, repairing a relay tower. He had read it late, meant to answer. Waited until morning. Morning became afternoon. Then came the notice. Accident, slope failure, recovery delayed. A man could build a whole excuse out of bad timing. But the heart knew the difference between circumstance and avoidance. Morrow came from the doorway without sound. He stopped beside the bed and looked at the photograph. The change in him was quiet but unmistakable. His ears softened, his eyes fixed on Elias's face. Then he lowered his muzzle onto Callum's knee, not like a pet asking comfort. Like a soldier placing the last piece of a broken message where it belonged, Callum laid one hand on the dog's neck, careful of the collar sore. "I should have called him back," he said. Morrow did not absolve him. That was not the dog's job. He only stayed. And somehow that was harder to bear. By morning, the storm had cleared. Sunlight lay across Larkwater Lake in long silver bands, and the pines glittered under fresh snow. The world looked forgiven, which Callum found rude, considering how much remained unresolved. He packed the Bronco with food, blankets, medical supplies, maps, and the old photograph. He placed the dented tin bowl on the rear floorboard. Morrow came to the open truck door and climbed in without being asked. Callum stood there for a second, one hand resting on the roof. "You sure?" Morrow settled on the blanket, wrapped paw tucked beneath him, eyes already turned toward the road. Callum gave a short breath. Not quite a laugh, but closer than he had been in days. "All right, old man, bring the holy bowl." He shut the door gently. Beyond the windshield, the road curved away from Larkwater and toward the far white country, where Granite Hollow waited under its polished snow, carrying a dead man's official story like a clean coat over a bloodstain. Callum started the engine. This time he was not driving away from silence. He was driving toward the place where it had begun. Granite Hollow looked innocent from the road. That was the first thing Callum disliked about it. The town sat in a bowl of winter light beneath the eastern ridge, its rooftops softened by fresh snow, its windows throwing back the morning sun in clean, golden squares. Main Street curved gently past brick storefronts, a small post office, a church with a white steeple, and a town square where volunteers were preparing for the weekend ice festival. Sculptures stood half-finished beneath canvas covers, a deer with antlers like frozen branches, an eagle rising from a block of clear blue ice, a miner holding a lantern toward some imagined future. It was the kind of place people called charming because they did not have to live under what fed it. Above the town, on the mountain shoulder, the North Star aggregate site gleamed with industrial patience. Conveyor lines, floodlights, storage silos, and steel sheds marked the slope like a second town built without a church. Even at that distance, Callum could see trucks moving along the cut road, their tires dark against the snow. Granite Hollow smiled below. North Star watched from above. Callum slowed the Bronco as he entered town. Morrow sat in the back, wrapped foreleg tucked beneath him, head raised but low. The dog had slept little on the drive. He had watched the passing forest with the grim alertness of a soldier returning to ground where the map had once lied. When the first North Star truck rolled past in the opposite lane, Morrow's body changed. No bark, no dramatic lunge, just a tightening through the shoulders, ears forward, jaw closing around breath. A low sound moved in his chest, too controlled to be panic and too old to be simple anger. Callum glanced in the mirror. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I smell it too." Not literally, perhaps. But there were places where money, fear, and fresh paint shared a scent. He parked outside the Blue Antler Diner, a low building with wide windows, fogged at the edges, and a painted sign of a blue-antlered buck over the door. The sidewalk had been shoveled clean. A bell over the entrance gave a tired little ring when Callum stepped inside. Heat met him first. Then coffee, then bacon grease, old wood, wet wool, and the soft murmur of people stopping a conversation a half-second too late. The diner was nearly full. Men in work jackets hunched over plates. A pair of older women shared toast near the window. Someone laughed at the counter, then saw Callum and forgot what had been funny. His olive combat shirt showed beneath his open field jacket, and strangers in small towns often noticed a man dressed like he still planned for weather and trouble to arrive together. Behind the counter, Tessa Marlowe poured coffee with the authority of a woman who had seen every kind of man try to hide sadness behind a cup. She was sturdy, red-haired, and quick-eyed, with a towel over one shoulder and a pencil tucked behind her ear. Her apron was dark denim, embroidered with a small blue antler at the chest. She looked at Callum's boots first, then his face, then through the window at the Bronco. "Coffee?" she asked. "Black. Food? Not yet. That's what men say right before they become everyone else's problem." Callum looked at her. She set a mug in front of him. "You're welcome." He almost smiled. Almost. He took the counter stool near the register. From there, he could see the truck through the window. Morrow's silhouette sat still behind the glass, ears pointed toward the street. Tessa followed his gaze. For the first time, her briskness changed. "That dog yours?" Callum kept one hand around the mug. "That's a complicated question. Most questions worth asking are—" He took the old photograph from inside his jacket and placed it on the counter. Tessa did not touch it right away. She looked down, and whatever answer she had been ready to make died before becoming sound. In the picture, Elias Vance stood under harsh sun beside a younger Callum and a younger Morrow. Elias's half-smile had survived the years in ink better than it had survived the mountain. Tessa picked up the photograph with flour-dusted fingers. "Elias," she said. Not a question. The room had gone quieter behind Callum. Not silent, exactly. Small towns rarely went fully silent. They had learned the camouflage of spoons, chairs, coughing, radio static. "He came here?" Callum asked. "Early mornings, before the quarry truck started." Tessa set the photograph down carefully. "Coffee black. Toast if I bullied him. Meat scraps for the dog if I pretended I was throwing them out. Morrow." Her eyes flicked toward the window again. "He looked better then. So did most of us." That earned him a dry glance. "You always this cheerful?" "Only before breakfast." Tessa turned away, poured more coffee into a cup that did not need it, then wiped a spot on the counter that was already clean. Callum recognized the motion. People polished surfaces when the truth underneath them would not come off. "What do you know about the accident?" he asked. A fork clicked against a plate somewhere behind him. Tessa's hand slowed. "Officially? I didn't drive here for officially." "No," she said. "Men who want officially wear cleaner boots." She leaned one hip against the counter, voice lower now. "Elias thought the pass was bad. Said the snowpack above St. Oran was layered wrong. Said the company was pushing too much weight through too soon because contracts don't care if mountains get moody." "And people listened?" Tessa looked toward the dining room. A man in a North Star jacket stared into his eggs. "No," she said. People nodded. "That's different." Callum let that sit. Outside, festival workers raised a string of golden lights from one lamppost to another. The bulbs glowed even in daylight, cheerful and unnecessary. The whole street seemed determined to prove that nothing ugly had ever been buried here. Tessa slid the photograph back. "Here's the thing about Granite Hollow," she said. "Nobody has to put a hand over your mouth. They just remind you the electric bill comes every month." Callum looked at her. "North Star pays half this town one way or another," she went on. "Wages, road repairs, festival money, clinic donations, scholarships for grown men's nephews. They still call kids even when they're 30. You want truth here? You better know what it costs." There it was. Not villainy with a knife. A town with a mortgage. Before Callum could answer, Morrow barked once from the Bronco. Sharp, not alarm, not fear, recognition. The diner door opened behind Callum, and the bell gave its tired ring again. A deputy stepped in, bringing cold air and the faint smell of snow on wool. He was broad through the chest and thick at the neck, with a square face, close-cut dark hair, and a brown uniform under a heavy sheriff's jacket. His hat was dusted white along the brim. His eyes moved from Tessa to Callum, then through the window to the Bronco. He smiled. It was quick and official, and did not improve his face. "Morning, Tessa." "Deputy Creed." Callum turned on the stool. The deputy approached slowly, thumbs tucked near his belt, posture casual enough to be practiced. "You're new in town," he said. "Passing through." People passing through don't usually bring old photographs into diners. Depends what they're hungry for. Tessa made a sound behind the counter that might have been a cough if anyone cared to lie about it. The deputy's smile thinned. "Amos Creed," he said. "Deputy Sheriff." Callum Rourke. Creed held out a hand. Callum shook it. The grip was firm, a little too measured. Creed glanced at the photograph still on the counter. He did not pick it up. "Elias Vance," he said. "Sad business." "You knew him?" "Knew of him. Town small." "And the dog?" This time Creed looked out the window. Morrow stood now inside the Bronco. front paws on the rear seat, amber eyes fixed through the glass. Something small passed across Creed's face. Not surprise. Recognition trying to put on a coat. "That animal was reported dangerous," Creed said. Tessa's jaw tightened. Callum did not look away from Creed. "By whom?" "Multiple concerned parties." That's a wide name. He had a history of aggression after the accident. People were warned not to approach. Morrow did not growl through the glass. He only stared. Somehow that made the space between the three humans feel smaller. Creed shifted his weight. His hand went briefly to the badge on his jacket, thumb rubbing the edge as if checking it was still there. "If that's the same dog," he said, "you should hand him over, for everyone's safety." Callum's voice stayed level. "He's under veterinary care. Local authority still applies. So does common sense." Tessa reached for the coffee pot. "More coffee, Deputy?" "No." "You sure? You look like a man swallowing nails." Creed's eyes flicked to her. "Careful, Tessa." A silence opened. Not dramatic. Worse. Familiar. The kind of silence a town used when everyone knew where the line was and no one wanted to be first to step over it. Callum stood. He placed money on the counter and took the photograph. "I'll be around." Creed looked at him for a long second. "That may not be wise." Callum zipped his jacket. "Most useful things aren't." He walked out before Creed could answer. Outside, the air felt cleaner, though colder. Morrow watched him return with the stillness of an animal who had understood more than words. Callum opened the rear door and rested a hand briefly against the dog's neck. "You made an impression," he said. Morrow exhaled through his nose. Behind the diner window, Creed remained standing near the counter, but he was no longer looking at Callum. He was looking at the dog. Callum spent the next hour moving through Granite Hollow without asking too many questions at once. The hardware store clerk suddenly became busy when he mentioned Elias. An elderly man outside the post office remembered the dog but not the week of the accident, which was a strange thing for someone who recalled the price of nails from 1,987. A woman selling knitted hats in the square told him Elias had been a decent man, then crossed herself as if decency had become dangerous. Every answer bent away from the center. Every face knew the road, but refused to point. Near noon, Callum found the office of the Granite Ledger tucked above a closed pharmacy, up a narrow stairwell smelling of dust and old heat. The frosted glass door had black letters peeling at the edges. "Morrow, local reporting, print, archive." He knocked once. "Open if you're not selling something," a woman called from inside. The room beyond was narrow and cluttered with file boxes, taped photographs, old newspapers, a printer that sounded as though it resented existence, and 3 plants at various stages of moral defeat. Morrow sat at a desk near the window, one boot hooked under her chair, a pen held between her teeth. She was in her mid-40s, with shoulder-length brown hair clipped back on one side and eyes that looked tired before they looked kind. Her burgundy turtleneck had ink on the cuff. A silver recorder lay beside her hand like a little sleeping animal. She took the pen from her mouth. "You are either lost, angry, or hear about a dead man." Callum paused. "Those can overlap." "Usually do." She leaned back. "Which dead man?" "Elias Vance." Her expression did not change much, but her fingers moved toward the recorder, then stopped. "No." "No what?" "No interview. No quote. No mysterious outsider with a military haircut dragging me into a lawsuit because grief got bored." Callum looked around the office. "You always this welcoming?" "Only to men who think truth is a door you kick in." He appreciated her immediately, which was inconvenient. "I'm not here to use you." That is what people say when they have not yet explained how they plan to use you. Callum took the collar tag from his pocket and set it on the desk. Mara did not touch it. She read it from where she sat. Morrow. Then the inner mark. E.V. M17. Her face changed then. Not softened. Focused. "Where did you get that?" "He found me." Mara looked toward the window. From this angle, the Bronco was visible below, Morrow's head raised behind the rear glass. For once, Mara had no quick answer. She stood and went to the window. "That dog was supposed to be dead," she said. "Not according to him." Mara looked back at Callum. "You know how many stories start with somebody walking in here holding one dramatic object? Do they usually involve a registry-scrubbed K9 and a dead safety consultant?" "No," she admitted. "Usually it's zoning." That almost became humor. Almost. Mara sat again, but now she pulled open a lower drawer and removed a folder with no label. Inside were clippings, notes, printed emails, photographs of snowpack, and a draft article marked with red legal comments. "I wrote about Elias," she said. "Once." "What happened?" "North Star's attorney sent a letter large enough to qualify as furniture. Advertisers got nervous. People I'd known for years stopped meeting my eye in the grocery store." She tapped the folder. "So I did what cowards do. I renamed Caution." Callum said nothing. That made her look at him more sharply. "You're not going to tell me I shouldn't blame myself?" "No?" "Good. I hate that speech." She pushed one photograph toward him. St. Oran Pass, marked in red. Elias believed the upper slope was unstable. Not maybe unstable. Not monitor closely unstable. He thought North Star was one heavy convoy away from killing somebody. He was preparing to file with the state. When? Week he died. Callum stared at the map. The room seemed to narrow. Mara lowered her voice. 2 days before the accident, he told me off the record that if something happened, it wouldn't be because he got careless. Callum's hand closed slowly over the edge of the desk. "And you didn't print that?" "No," she said. "I didn't." There was no defense in her voice, only the flat ruin of someone who had already held court against herself and lost. "Down on the street?" Morrow barked once. Mara looked toward the window. Callum did too. A North Star pickup had rolled past the Bronco, slow enough to be noticed, not slow enough to be accused. Morrow stood rigid behind the glass. Morrow watched the truck disappear. "You still want to know where Elias spent his last week?" "Yes." "Then you don't start at North Star," she said. "You start where things got moved after he died." She grabbed her coat. The storage yard sat near the old rail spur at the edge of town, where heaps of road salt and gravel rested beneath tarps. A locked warehouse stood behind a chain-link fence. North Star logos marked the signs, the gate, the trucks, even the warning placards. Ownership had a way of repeating itself until it became weather. Mara stayed on the public side of the fence. "I'm not getting arrested today," she said. "I have laundry." Callum looked at her. "What?" "Courage is important. So are clean socks." Morrow moved along the fence line, nose low. He did not pull wildly. His movements were careful, interrupted by brief pauses where scent seemed to rise from under the snow like memory thawing. At the rear corner of the fence, he stopped. His wrapped paw lifted. He stared at a patch of snow beneath a sagging section of wire. Then he began to scrape, not frantically. Not like a dog digging for treasure, like a worker uncovering a mark. Callum crouched beside him and brushed snow aside with one glove. A strip of blue fabric clung to a barb low on the fence, faded, weather-stiff, torn. Mara inhaled. "What?" Callum asked. She took a small evidence bag from her coat pocket, then seemed irritated that he noticed. "Reporters have hobbies." "Mara, that color." Her voice had lost its dryness. Elias wore a slate blue field jacket, Vance safety consulting patch. "I remember because he complained it made him look like a municipal snowman." Callum did not touch the fabric again. From the other side of the yard, a door opened. 2 North Star workers stepped out. One was tall and heavy, the other younger and nervous. Both wore orange reflective jackets. The younger man saw Morrow and stopped so abruptly his boots slid on the packed snow. "Hey," the heavy one called, "you can't be back here." "We're on the public side," Mara said. "This is restricted company property." "The sidewalk?" "The fence. Congratulations on owning geometry." Callum stood slowly. The heavy worker's eyes went to him, then to Morrow, then back to Mara. "You need to leave." Morrow did not bark, but his body placed itself between Callum and the men. Callum saw the younger worker swallow, not because of teeth, because of recognition. That was enough. Callum touched 2 fingers lightly to Morrow's shoulder. "We're done." Mara sealed the fabric in the bag and slipped it into her coat. They walked away without hurrying. No chase, no shouting, no heroic confrontation. Just the unpleasant knowledge that a fence had remembered something people were trying to forget. That evening, Callum rented the last room at a roadside lodge called the Miner's Rest. The room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet. Through the window, Granite Hollow glowed below the ridge, its ice festival lights turning the snow gold and blue. Morrow refused the dog bed Callum bought from the general store. He sat by the door instead. The tin bowl rested beside his front paws. Callum sat on the floor across from him, back against the bed, the bagged strip of fabric on the table, Mara's map folded beside it. Outside, laughter drifted faintly from the square where volunteers tested the festival lights. A town could look gentle while practicing fear. Callum thought of Tessa wiping a clean glass, Creed rubbing his badge, Mara naming caution, the younger worker swallowing at the sight of a dog who should have been dead. He had come to Granite Hollow carrying guilt for a call unanswered. That guilt was still there, a thorn under the ribs. But now something larger had begun to take shape around it. This was not only about Elias, not only about Morrow. This town had learned to survive by lowering its eyes, and survival had become its chapel. Morrow leaned forward and touched the rim of the tin bowl with his nose. A soft tap. Callum looked at him. "All right," he said. "I hear you." He opened the old photograph of Elias and placed it on the floor between them. Morrow lowered his head beside it, not touching the image, only keeping watch. Outside, the lights of Granite Hollow shone brighter as night deepened, beautiful as candles on a frozen altar. But beneath that beauty, Callum could feel it now. A crack running back 3 winters. And somewhere under the snow, the truth had begun to thaw. Callum did not go to North Star the next morning. That would have been the easy move, which meant it was probably the wrong one. Men like Bennett Crow, whoever he was behind the polished company statements and donated festival lights, did not fear anger. Anger announced itself. Anger left fingerprints on doors. Anger gave lawyers something to quote. What men like that feared was patience, quiet questions, asked in the wrong order, small facts laid side by side until a clean report began to rot from the middle. So Callum sat across from Mara Keene in the cramped office above the old pharmacy, while Granite Hollow woke beneath them. A printer coughed near the wall. Pipes ticked in the ceiling. Outside, volunteers in the square tested more ice festival lights, cheerful little stars strung across a town pretending it had nothing to confess. Mara spread papers across her desk. Weather records, archived town notices, old road closure alerts, North Star convoy schedules she had copied before the company changed its public portal, and a half-finished draft of the article that had once made her enemies with excellent stationery. Callum studied everything without touching much. Morrow lay by the office door, wrapped paw stretched forward, tin bowl beside him. He had chosen that position himself, not under the desk, not near the heater, between the room and the stairs, Mara noticed. He always do that? When he thinks the door matters. Must be exhausting, being that responsible. Callum looked down at the dog. You get used to it. Mara gave him a look. That was not as charming as you think it was. I wasn't aiming for charming. Clearly. It should not have helped, the dry back and forth, but it did. Humor, Callum had learned, was sometimes just a shovel people used to clear enough snow off grief to find the latch underneath. Mara slid a map toward him. Elias worked out of Winter Rescue Station 6 during his last month. Technically county property before North Star signed a service agreement. After the accident, North Star moved the rescue equipment to their own facility, said it was for efficiency. Was it? It was efficient for removing things from where Elias kept them. Callum looked at the red circles on the map. You think anything's still there? I think if North Star cleaned it, they cleaned what they understood. Morrow lifted his head. Not suddenly. Not with a bark. Just enough that Callum saw the old dog's ears angle toward the map as if paper could carry a scent. Mara saw it too. For once, she did not make a joke. The road to Winter Rescue Station 6 ran north of town, past the last houses, past an abandoned snowmobile rental shed, then into a stand of white birch trees where the light changed color. The birches stood thin and pale under the snow, their black markings like old handwriting on bone. Mara drove her aging Subaru because, she said, Callum's Bronco looked too much like an invitation to either a rescue or an arrest. She wore a dark teal parka, black gloves, and a burgundy scarf tucked high against her chin. A silver recorder rested in the cup holder, though it was not turned on. Callum sat in the passenger seat, watching the road. Morrow rode in the back, not resting, never quite resting. The station appeared behind a bend in the birches, a low concrete building with a flat roof and a faded blue number 6 painted near the door. Snow covered the front steps. One window had been boarded from the inside. An old radio mast stood beside it, bent slightly at the top, like a finger that had once pointed toward help and then given up. Mara killed the engine. For a moment, neither of them got out. The building did not look sinister. That was what made it worse. It looked plain, useful, forgotten. Places where truth went to die rarely looked theatrical. They looked underfunded. You all right? Mara asked. Callum glanced at her. She shrugged. Your jaw did that thing. What thing? The thing where it looks like you're trying to bite through a memory. He opened the door. Let's work. Inside, the air smelled of concrete dust, cold metal, and old smoke. Their flashlights moved over empty shelving, a stripped bulletin board, a broken chair, and a row of lockers hanging open like mouths. North Star had been thorough in the obvious places. File drawers sat empty. A wall map had been removed, leaving pale rectangles where the paper had shielded the paint from years of stove soot. A desk near the window had only mouse droppings and a cracked plastic tray. Even the old radio console had been gutted. Mara stood in the middle of the room, jaw tight. They knew exactly where to look. No, Callum said. They knew where a civilian would look. She turned toward him. That's supposed to be encouraging? No. Morrow crossed the room slowly. His nose went to the lockers first, then the desk, then the stove. At each place, he paused, tested, moved on. Twice, he seemed to catch something and lose it again. His body held tension, but not certainty. Callum watched carefully. He remembered what he had learned at Larkwater. Not every reaction was a clue. Some were scars answering questions no one had asked. At the sound of Mara dragging a metal chair aside, Morrow flinched and dropped low, eyes wide. Callum raised one hand. Stop! Mara froze. Morrow's breathing quickened. Sorry, she said, quieter than usual. Callum did not go to the dog immediately. He crouched where he was and set 2 fingers against the floor, a grounding gesture he had used once with young handlers and frightened animals. Morrow stared at him, caught between the room and some older place where metal noise meant pain. Then Callum reached into his jacket pocket and took out the dented tin bowl. He had not intended to bring it inside. Morrow had. The old dog touched the rim with his nose. A small sound, metal, present, safe enough. His breathing steadied. Morrow watched with an expression that had lost all its sharp edges. He carries that thing like a witness, she said. Callum looked at Morrow. Maybe he is. The dog stood again. This time he moved differently, not faster, more certain. He went to the far wall behind the dead stove, where a rusted vent pipe disappeared into the floor. He lowered his head, sniffed the seam, then pawed gently at a half-buried metal cover near the base. No frenzy, no miracle. A remembered task. Callum knelt beside him. The cover had been painted over, then scratched by age and heat. He used his knife to pry at the edge. It resisted, then lifted with a soft, gritty complaint. Below it was not a secret room, not a dramatic vault. Just an old snowmelt drainage pipe, wide enough for a hand and lined with dark ice. Callum reached in. His fingers touched cloth. He drew out a small waterproof box wrapped in oilskin and sealed with tape so old it cracked under his thumb. Morrow stopped breathing. Callum set the box on the floor between them. For a second, no one opened it. The station creaked in the wind. Outside, snow tapped softly against the boarded window. Morrow stood over the box, head low, eyes fixed on it as if waiting for a command from a voice that would never come again. Callum cut the tape. Inside were no answers large enough to satisfy grief, only pieces. Photographs of a snow face above St. Oran Pass, marked with dates and arrows. A folded hand-drawn map with red X's along the convoy route. Pages from a field notebook in Elias's tight handwriting. A small memory card cracked along one corner. 2 printed weather reports. And a torn strip of paper with one name written in block letters. Vera Holt. Morrow reached for the notes, then stopped herself and took out her phone to photograph everything first. "Elias hid this," she said. "He didn't hide it for us." "No," Morrow said, voice low. "He hid it for the dog." Callum looked at her. She tapped the pipe with one gloved finger. A person would use the desk, a locker, maybe a floorboard. But this? This is a drop point, something trained. Morrow lowered himself beside the box, as if the words had placed a weight on his back. Callum opened one of the notebook pages. Elias had written in practical lines, not dramatic ones. Layer separation above Oran cutoff, worse after freeze-thaw. North Star wants convoy window before state review. Crow says delay unacceptable. Needs second copy off-site. M knows pipe. M knows pipe. Callum read the line twice. Morrow knew. For 3 years, some part of him had carried the shape of this room, this pipe, this unfinished order. Morrow turned away suddenly. Callum did not ask why. He already knew. This was what guilt did when it found proof it had been standing too far from the fire. They took the box and left the station exactly as they found it, minus the one thing Elias had trusted a dog to remember. Vera Holt lived in a squat house near the old machine yard east of town, where retired snowplows and rusted excavator buckets sat under tarps like sleeping beasts. Smoke came from her chimney in a straight gray line. The porch had been shoveled, but badly, as if the person doing it resented both snow and porches. Morrow knocked. A voice inside barked, "If that's church people, I already gave guilt at the office." Morrow glanced at Callum. "That's Vera." The door opened on a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair cut blunt at her jaw, sharp blue-gray eyes, and safety glasses pushed up on her head like a crown belonging to the queen of broken machinery. She wore a black thermal shirt under an open flannel, work pants, and boots that looked capable of winning an argument. Her gaze hit Morrow first. "No. You don't know what I'm asking. I know your face. That's enough." Then Vera looked at Callum. Her eyes traveled over his jacket, his posture, the shape of his silence. "Oh, good," she said. "A former soldier. Let me guess, you think staring hard enough opens locks." Callum said. "Only cheap ones." For the first time, Vera seemed mildly entertained. Then Morrow stepped from behind him into view. The sarcasm left her face so quickly, it looked painful. The old dog stood in the snow, one ear torn, foreleg wrapped, amber eyes fixed on Vera. He did not wag his tail. He did not growl. He simply stood there, alive. Vera gripped the doorframe. "Well?" she said, and her voice was no longer sharp. "There's a ghost with paws." Morrow held out the photograph from the box. "We found your name." Vera's face closed again, but not completely. "Inside," she said. Her kitchen smelled of wood smoke, motor oil, and black tea. Tools sat on one side of the table. Pill bottles lined the windowsill beside a dead basil plant. Vera cleared space by sweeping a wrench and 2 screws into a drawer with one impatient motion. She looked through Elias's photographs in silence. When she reached the image of St. Oran Pass, she sat down. "That crack line," she said. "I told them." "North Star?" Callum asked. "North Star, county, anybody with ears not packed full of payroll." Vera tapped the photograph. Upper slab was waiting for one good shove. Elias saw it too. "What happened?" Vera looked at him. "You don't get the full song for free, soldier." Mara leaned forward. "Vera." "No." Vera's voice hardened, though fear moved beneath it. "You got papers. You got a dog. You got heroic cheekbones over there. What you don't have is protection." Callum accepted that. "What do we need?" Vera stared at him for a long moment. Then she pulled a notepad closer and drew a rough diagram. St. Oran had a secondary avalanche control trigger box. Old analog system, mechanical log wheel, not connected to North Star's main digital records. If someone fired a charge manually, that wheel marked time and sequence. Would North Star know? Bennett Crow knows money. He knows pressure. He knows which palms sweat before they shake. Vera's mouth twisted. He never knew the old equipment unless someone explained it twice and flattered him both times. Mara pointed to the diagram. Could the log still be there? Maybe, if they forgot it. If mice didn't eat the housing. If God was bored and decided to help the honest for once. Callum looked at the drawn box. "Can you read it?" Vera sat back. "I can read it better than the fool who installed it, because I was the fool who installed it." Outside, a distant mine siren sounded. Morrow's body slammed into tension. His head dropped, his shoulders bunched. For one terrible second, he was not in Vera's kitchen. He was back in some white roar where metal, men, and mountain all spoke at once. Callum reached for the bowl, but Vera moved first. She picked up a spoon from the table and tapped it once, softly, against an empty ceramic mug. Tinny, small, gentle. Morrow's eyes shifted to her. "Wrong sound, old boy," she said very quietly. "That one's now. Not then." The dog's breathing eased by a fraction. Callum looked at Vera differently after that. She saw it and scowled. "Don't make a hymn out of me. I'm not that kind of woman." "No?" Callum said. "You're useful." "That's worse." They left with the diagram folded inside Mara's coat, and more questions than comfort. They had gone less than half a mile from Vera's house when a black pickup without plates appeared in the rearview mirror. Callum noticed it first. Mara, driving, noticed his silence. "What?" "Keep steady." The pickup came close. Too close. Mara's hands tightened on the wheel. "Please tell me this is Montana friendliness." "Left curve ahead," Callum said. "Don't brake hard." The pickup surged. Its bumper clipped the Subaru's rear corner. The car fishtailed. Mara swore, corrected, lost traction again. Snow exploded against the windows as the Subaru slid into the roadside ditch and slammed to a stop at an angle hard enough to throw Callum against the seatbelt. Morrow barked from the back. 3 sharp blasts. The black pickup kept going and vanished into the white bend ahead. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Mara laughed once, breathless and furious. "Well," she said, "that feels like confirmation." Callum turned to check Morrow. The dog was shaken but upright. His wrapped paw had held. His eyes burned toward the road where the truck had disappeared. Mara pushed her hair out of her face. "We publish. Today." "No." She stared at him. "No? Not enough. We have Elias's notes, erased records, a hidden box, Vera's diagram, and somebody just tried to put us in a ditch. We have suspicion. We have a pattern. Patterns don't survive lawyers." "Evidence does." Mara's face flushed with anger. "You think I don't know that?" "I think you want to fire the first round because you're tired of waiting. And you want to wait because waiting is easier than admitting this scares you." That landed. Callum opened his mouth, then closed it. Snow slid down the cracked windshield in slow white lines. Morrow whined once behind them, not from injury, but from the rising heat between the humans. Callum looked at the dog, then at Mara. "Elias called me," he said. Mara's anger faltered. "Before he died. 3 weeks. Then again, the week of. I didn't answer fast enough. Last message said something didn't sit right." Mara looked away. Callum continued, because once a truth left cover, it was foolish to abandon it halfway. "I told myself he was fine. Told myself if it mattered, he'd call again. Then he was dead, and I accepted a report because accepting it meant I didn't have to look at the fact that I hadn't shown up." The car seemed smaller after that. Mara's voice, when it came, was quieter. "I had his quote." Callum looked at her. "Not recorded cleanly. Off the record, technically. But he told me if something happened, it wouldn't be because he misread the mountain." She swallowed. "I could have pushed harder. I didn't. North Star leaned on my advertisers, people stopped returning calls, and I told myself staying alive as a reporter meant choosing the next fight. Maybe it did. Don't. All right." She laughed again, but this time it had no humor. "Look at us." Two professionals of regret. Morrow lowered his head onto the back of the seat, watching them both. Callum said, "We don't publish yet, but we don't sit on it either." Morrow wiped one hand over her face, then pulled out her phone. The signal flickered weakly. "I know someone at the state office," she said. "Rachel Sloan, mining safety investigator. Cold as February and twice as fun. She won't move for feelings, but she might move for documents. Send copies. Encrypted." "Good? And if she ignores it?" Callum looked out at the snow-covered road leading toward the mountain. "Then we get something she can't ignore." That evening, back in Mara's office, they scanned every page from Elias's box, photographed the fabric strip, copied Vera's diagram, and wrote a clean timeline. Morrow worked fast. Anger sharpened into discipline. Callum sat by the door with Morrow, reading each file name before she sent it. At 9:17 p.m., the package went out. For 23 minutes, nothing happened. Then Mara's computer chimed. A reply. Mara opened it. Rachel Sloane's message was short. "No greeting, no comfort, no promises. If a mechanical firing log exists, do not let it disappear." Mara leaned back. Callum read the sentence twice. Morrow slept at last beside the door, tin bowl between his paws, old collar resting against his scarred throat. Outside the office window, Granite Hollow shone under falling snow. The ice festival lights were still being hung, bright and foolish and lovely. Above them, unseen beyond the ridge, St. Oran Pass waited in the dark like an old mouth with one truth left under its tongue. Callum folded Elias's note and placed it beside the map. Tomorrow would require care. Not rage, not redemption, care. That was the harder discipline. Before they went up St. Oran Pass, Callum wanted the man who had heard the mountain lie. Harlan Pike lived west of Granite Hollow in a narrow house near the frozen edge of Morrow Lake, where the wind came low across the ice and pushed dirty snow against the porch steps. The place had once been painted white. Years of weather had reduced it to a tired gray, the color of old bone. A rusted snowblower sat beside the shed, half buried, as if it too had given up waiting for spring. Mara drove. Callum sat beside her with Elias's notes folded in his jacket, and Morrow lay across the back seat, awake but quiet. Vera Holt had refused to come. "Pike talks better when he doesn't feel outnumbered," Vera had said over the phone. "And tell Soldier Boy not to glare at him like a courthouse statue. Harlan's a coward, not a murderer. There's a difference, sometimes." Mara had repeated the advice as they turned down the lake road. Callum had said nothing. "See?" Mara muttered. "That's the courthouse statue thing." At Harlan's house, the curtains were drawn, though it was nearly noon. Smoke from the chimney bent sideways in the wind. Callum knocked twice. Something coughed inside. Then a voice called, thin and irritated, "If you're selling insulation, I already got enough between me and the world." The door opened. Harlan Pike looked smaller than his file photo. He was 64, but illness had stolen the spare parts first. The weight from his cheeks, the strength from his back, the steadiness from his hands. His hair was white and thin, his beard uneven, his skin gray around the mouth. He wore an old work jacket over a brown sweater, and one hand gripped the doorframe while the other held an inhaler like a weapon he did not trust. His eyes went to Callum, then Mara. "No," he said. Mara lifted both hands. "Good morning to you, too. I know why you're here. Then we can save time." "I don't remember anything." Callum watched him. Harlan's gaze jumped once toward the Bronco. Morrow sat visible through the rear window. The old man's hand tightened around the inhaler. Callum did not push the door, did not step closer. He had learned that fear, when cornered, often pretended to be principle. "We're not here to hurt you," he said. Harlan laughed, but it turned into a cough that bent him forward. He covered his mouth with a handkerchief and waved them away. "People always say that right before they take something." Mara's voice softened, just enough. "Harlan, Elias Vance is still carrying the blame for what happened up there." At the name, Harlan's face closed. "Elias is dead." "Yes," Callum said. "And someone made sure his good name died slower." Harlan looked at him then. The wind moved snow along the porch in thin white streams. Behind Callum, the Bronco's rear door creaked as Morrow shifted. Harlan heard it. His eyes moved past Callum again. Callum turned and opened the truck door. Morrow stepped down carefully, wrapped foreleg touching the snow first. He did not come forward fast. He did not growl. He did not wag his tail. He walked to the edge of the porch and stopped. Harlan stared. All the color left his face. For a few seconds, there was no sound, except the lake wind and the faint click of Morrow's collar tag. The old dog looked at Harlan with terrible calm. Not accusation. That would have been easier. Accusation gave a man something to argue with. Morrow only looked at him as if he remembered the shape of a door closing. Harlan made a small sound. "Oh, Lord," he whispered. "You lived." Morrow did not move. Harlan's eyes filled, but no tear fell. Shame, Callum thought, sometimes froze before it could leave the body. The old man stepped back. "Come in before I change my mind." The house smelled of old smoke, stale coffee, damp wool, and medicines lined on the kitchen counter. A small oxygen tank stood near a recliner facing the window. On the wall hung a faded photograph of men in snow gear beside a North Star plow truck, all of them younger, grinning, not yet aware of which memories would sour. Harlan lowered himself into a chair at the kitchen table. Morrow entered last and stood near the door, tin bowl between his front paws. He had carried it from the truck himself, as if this testimony required all its relics. Harlan saw the bowl. His face twisted. "I fed him once," he said. No one had asked yet. That was how long the confession had been waiting. Mara took out her recorder, then paused. "May I?" Harlan looked at the device, then at Morrow. "Not yet." Mara set it down without turning it on. Harlan rubbed both hands over his face. "After the slide." 2 days after, maybe 3. Hard to remember. Everything was sirens, and men saying weather like weather had signed the paperwork. He swallowed. "I was out by the machine yard. Heard something dragging behind the salt shed." Morrow lowered his head. "He was there," Harlan said. "Bleeding around the neck. One leg torn up. Half froze. Wouldn't let me touch him. But he ate from my hand. Slow. Like he thought kindness might be a trick." Callum's jaw tightened, but he kept silent. "I should have called somebody decent," Harlan continued. "Should have loaded him in my truck. Should have done one brave thing before breakfast." He gave a bitter little laugh. "Instead, I brought him scraps twice. Then Creed came by." Mara leaned forward. "Deputy Creed?" Harlan nodded. Said the dog was evidence tied to a company incident. Said if anyone hid him, fed him, moved him, we could be charged. Said he might be dangerous, rabid maybe, attack-trained. He used enough official words to make a coward grateful for instructions. "And you believed him?" Callum asked. Harlan looked up. "No," he said. "I obeyed him. Different sin." The room went still. There it was, the reek of a small human failure, not monstrous enough for easy hatred, not small enough to forgive quickly. Harlan's voice thinned. I shut the shed door. "Watched that dog limp off into snow. Been hearing that door close for 3 years. Morrow sat down. Not beside Harlan, not beside Callum, in the space between them. Callum looked at the old dog and understood something that did not comfort him. Morrow had not come to punish Harlan. He had come because the past had a roll call, and everyone who answered late still had to answer. Harlan coughed hard into his handkerchief. When he lowered it, his hand shook. "There's more," he said. Mara's eyes sharpened. "The night Elias died, I was working the lower plow line. North Star called it equipment staging. Mostly it meant keeping roads pretty enough for convoys and ugly enough for inspectors to stay away." Harlan stared at the tabletop. Elias's truck went up toward Henderson Ridge near dusk, but he wasn't alone. Callum felt the air tighten. Who was with him? Not with, behind. Harlan glanced toward the window, as if the mountain might be listening. Black North Star executive pickup, Bennett Crow's. I knew it by the auxiliary light bar. Man had to have everything custom, even his conscience. Mara reached for the recorder again. This time Harlan nodded. She turned it on. Harlan spoke slower, more carefully, but the words had broken loose now. He had seen Elias's truck climb toward the old service road. He had seen Bennett's pickup follow at a distance. Later, before the official time of the avalanche, Harlan had heard a sharp thud from the upper slope. Not a natural crack, not thunder, a charge. Small, controlled, or meant to be. After that, he said, the mountain answered bigger than anybody ordered. "What did you do?" Mara asked. Harlan's eyes closed. Nothing useful. He heard radio chatter cut short, saw snow dust rise from the pass. By the time he reached the lower gate, North Star security was already blocking the road. Creed arrived before the county search coordinator, before the coroner, before anybody who might ask the wrong question from the right side of the law. "He came to my house before sunrise," Harlan said. "Told me I'd been mistaken about any second vehicle. Told me if I liked my pension and my roof, I'd remember weather, not people." Callum leaned forward. "Will you make a statement?" Harlan looked at the recorder as though it were a bridge over a canyon. "Not yet." Mara opened her mouth. Callum lifted one hand slightly. Harlan saw it. "You think I'm still scared?" "You are." "Yes." The old man's voice cracked. "I am. Fear doesn't leave just because shame arrives. They sit together." "Make themselves comfortable." He reached under the table and pulled free a small key from a strip of duct tape. It was old brass, marked with red paint, almost worn away. Harlan slid it across the table. St. Oran Auxiliary Trigger Station, lower service cabinet. They changed digital codes twice since then, but that old mechanical box still had a master key. If they didn't tear it out, the firing wheel may still be inside. Mara stared at the key. Callum picked it up. "Why give us this if you won't testify?" Harlan looked at Morrow. "Because I closed one door on him," he said. "Maybe I can open one." They left Harlan's house with the recorder file, the key, and a silence that felt less empty than before. Vera was waiting at the turnoff to St. Oran Pass in her battered yellow utility Jeep, looking like an insult delivered by machinery. Safety glasses sat on her head. A thermos steamed in one hand. She looked at Callum's face, then Mara's. "He cried, didn't he?" Mara said. "Nearly." "Good. Nearly's more than most men can afford." Vera tossed Callum a pair of crampon straps. "Pass roads iced under powder." I'd rather not watch heroic cheekbones slide into federal paperwork. The climb toward St. Oran began under a sky so blue it seemed indecent. The mountain wore beauty like a priest's robe over a battlefield. Snow lay smooth over the pines. Wind lifted loose crystals from the ridgeline and spun them into shining veils. Below, Granite Hollow looked peaceful and small, its festival tents no bigger than toys, its lights pale in daylight. Morrow moved ahead on a long lead. Callum held the line, but did not pull. He watched the dog's shoulders, the angle of his head, the way his paws tested the snow before committing weight. Sometimes Morrow stopped because the surface ahead smelled wrong. Sometimes he stopped because memory struck him and his body forgot the present. Callum learned the difference by waiting. When Morrow's nose stayed low and his tail stiffened, it meant terrain. When his eyes fixed on nothing and his breath shortened, it meant then. At one point, a scrap of orange survey tape snapped in the wind from a branch. Morrow froze so hard the lead went taut. Callum did not command him forward. He stepped beside the dog and blocked the tape from view with his body. "You're here," he said quietly. "Not there." Morrow's ear twitched. Behind them, Vera muttered, "Damn dog's got more discipline than half the men I worked under." Mara, breathing hard from the climb, said, "That include Bennett Crow?" "Especially Bennett Crow." The auxiliary station stood half-buried beside a rocky outcrop below the upper-cut road. It looked like a metal shrine to bad decisions. A green cabinet bolted into concrete, warning labels bleached by weather, ice sealing one lower corner. Vera knelt with a grunt. "My knees were made by a committee that hated stairs," she said. Callum shielded her from the wind while Mara filmed the process. Vera inserted Harlan's key into the lower cabinet lock. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the lock turned with a reluctant click. Inside was the old analog firing log. A circular mechanical wheel, stamped notches, time marks, sequence indicators. Crude, stubborn, and wonderfully uninterested in corporate revision. Vera leaned close. Her mouth lost its sarcasm. "Well, I'll be damned." "What?" Callum asked. She pointed. "Manual trigger, night of the Vance slide." Her gloved finger moved to a second mark. Timestamp is 23 minutes before the official slide report. Mara's camera trembled slightly. "That proves the sequence was altered," she said. "It proves somebody fired before the mountain was supposed to fall," Vera said. "And somebody wrote a prettier bedtime story afterward." Callum looked toward the upper slope. Morrow stood rigid now, staring at the cut road above them. Not at snow, not at wind, at men. A black executive pickup had stopped near the ridge road. Behind it, a sheriff's vehicle idled, lights off. Bennett Crow stepped out first. Even on a mountain, the man looked arranged. Late 50s, silver hair combed neatly back beneath a dark cap, black parka too expensive to have met honest grease, gloves fitted close to clean hands. His face was long, handsome in a cold administrative way, and calm enough to be offensive. Deputy Amos Creed got out of the second vehicle. His hand hovered near his sidearm. His face did not share Bennett's calm. Bennett walked down toward them, as if approaching an unfortunate board meeting. "Mr. Rourke," he called, "you've wandered onto restricted infrastructure." Callum did not move. Mara kept filming. Vera stood slowly with the log housing still open behind her. Bennett's eyes flicked to it. For the first time, his calm paused. "Only a fraction, but enough." "Step away from the cabinet," Creed said. Vera snorted. "Boy, I installed this cabinet when your mustache was still an ambition." Creed's jaw tightened. Bennett lifted one hand, a gesture of management rather than mercy. "No one needs this to become ugly," he said. Elias Vance was a good man, a stubborn man. Sometimes the good ones are the hardest to save from themselves. Callum's voice stayed low. "You followed him up here." Bennett looked almost sad. "It was well done. Expensive, like everything else about him. I tried to stop him from destroying the town over a technical disagreement." "A lethal disagreement," Mara said. "A disputed one," Bennett corrected. "Do you know what happens when a pass shuts down mid-contract? Workers lose hours, families lose homes, businesses fold. Towns like Granite Hollow don't die in one dramatic moment, miss. Keen. They starve politely." Mara's face tightened. Bennett turned to Callum. Elias meant well, but he saw danger everywhere. Morrow growled. Bennett's eyes dropped to the dog. There was no kindness in them, only recognition and inconvenience. That animal, Bennett said, caused more confusion than any report ever did. Morrow's growl deepened. Creed shifted. Bennett. Callum saw it then. Bennett believed his own sermon. Creed did not. Bennett had turned guilt into policy. Creed was still standing in the mud, aware of the smell. "You didn't save the town," Callum said. "You used it as a shield." Bennett's jaw hardened. "Men like you always prefer simple morality. It gives you something to salute. Men like you always prefer complicated excuses. Gives you somewhere to hide." The wind changed. Morrow dropped low. Callum stopped speaking. A sound moved under the snowpack above them. Soft at first, then wider. A settling groan, deep as a sleeping beast rolling its shoulder. Vera looked up. "Oh, that's bad." Another crack answered from the slope. Creed's hand left his weapon. Bennett turned, finally losing the boardroom calm. Snow dust began to slide from the upper face in thin streams. Morrow barked once. Sharp, commanding. Callum heard the mountain shift again. No longer memory, no longer evidence, no longer a dead man's echo. This time St. Oran Pass was waking beneath their feet. The mountain did not roar at first. It sighed. That was what made it terrible. A long, low breath moved beneath St. Oran Pass, too deep to belong to wind, too wide to belong to any one crack in the snow. The slope above them shifted in layers, settling and breaking and remembering every bad decision men had hammered into it. Loose powder slipped from the upper face in thin, white streams. Then the first slab moved. "Down!" Callum shouted. He grabbed Mara by the back of her parka and pulled her toward the low stone wall near the auxiliary station. She stumbled, kept her camera clutched against her chest, and hit the snow beside him hard enough to knock the breath from her. Vera went down near the open cabinet with a curse sharp enough to cut glass. But even as she fell, both arms wrapped around the mechanical firing log as if it were a child she had no intention of losing. Creed slipped backward, boots skidding over ice. His hand flew toward his sidearm out of useless habit, then lost the weapon entirely. The gun spun once, vanished under blowing snow, and for the first time since Callum had met him, Deputy Amos Creed looked like a man without a costume. Bennett Crow tried to retreat uphill. The mountain punished arrogance quickly. A metal support arm near the station, loosened by the shifting snow and half rusted at its base, snapped sideways as a wave of powder and broken ice slammed into the outcrop. Bennett went down with a strangled cry. The beam pinned his lower leg against packed snow and rock. The main slide thundered past above them, not a full mountain collapse, but enough to turn the world white and blind. Snow dust swallowed sound, branches cracked, small stones rattled across ice. The air filled with a brightness so violent it felt like being buried in daylight. Callum pressed Mara low behind the wall and held until the worst of it passed. Then came the after silence, not peace. Assessment. Callum lifted his head. Snow dust drifted through the air. Vera coughed from somewhere to his left. "I still have the log," she rasped. Mara coughed too, then gave a breathless laugh. "That was your first concern?" "It's evidence," Vera snapped. "My ribs are just decoration." Creed was on his knees several yards away, one glove missing, face pale. Bennett lay half-buried near the cabinet, his expensive black parka torn at the sleeve. One leg trapped under the support arm. He was not screaming now. That took effort. Pride, Callum thought, had its own painkillers. Bennett saw Callum looking. "Rourke," he called, voice strained. "Help me." For a second, Callum did not move. The snow hissed softly around them. Somewhere above, the slope settled again with a warning groan. Every second mattered. And yet one dark, human thought passed through Callum with the clarity of Scripture carved in ice. Let the mountain keep him. The thought did not come dressed as rage. Rage would have been easier to recognize. This came colder, cleaner, wearing the mask of justice. Bennett had followed Elias up this pass. Bennett had helped turn a death into a lie. Bennett had left Morrow to become a monster in people's mouths, a dirty, starving thing with a tin bowl and no safe door. There were courts that moved slowly. Mountains did not. Callum's hand tightened in the snow. Then Morrow moved. The old shepherd had been thrown to one side by the powder blast, but he rose with effort, shaking ice from his black and tan coat. His wrapped foreleg buckled once. He corrected. His amber eyes found Callum first. Then Bennett. Morrow went toward the trapped man, not fast. Not like the proud young dog in Elias's photograph. His body was still recovering. His right foreleg stuttered on the crusted snow. His ribs worked hard beneath his winter-thick fur. The torn V of his ear flicked against the wind, but he went. "Morrow," Callum said. The dog did not stop. He reached Bennett and barked 3 times, sharp, hoarse, commanding. Bennett flinched as if the sound hurt more than the beam. Morrow dug at the snow around the pinned leg, then turned and looked back at Callum. There was no plea in the dog's eyes, no softness. Only an order older than revenge. Callum understood, and hated that he understood. Elias would not have left Bennett there. That was the unbearable thing about truly good men. They kept giving instructions after death. Callum rose and ran. Mara followed a beat later. Creed stayed frozen until Vera shouted, "Move, badge boy, or be useful enough to justify your boots." Creed stumbled forward. Together they dug around the metal arm. Bennett gasped when Callum cleared snow from the trapped leg. The beam had not crushed through bone, but it held him hard against the rock. The slope above them clicked and settled again. "Lift on 3, Callum said. Creed's voice shook. "It won't move." "Then lift afraid." Vera shoved the firing log into Mara's arms and limped toward them. "Don't pull him straight. Angle the beam. There's a hinge plate under the ice." Callum found it with one gloved hand. Old metal, bent but not dead. "1," he said. Morrow stood near Bennett's shoulder, growling now not at Bennett, but toward the upper slope. 2. Mara braced with both hands. Creed took the beam, face wet with sweat despite the cold. 3. They lifted. The beam shifted only inches, but inches were mercy when death had measured the gap in smaller units. Bennett dragged his leg free with a sound he tried and failed to swallow. Callum caught the front of his parka and pulled him clear, just as a second smaller spill of snow slid over the place where Bennett's boot had been. For a few seconds, they all lay scattered in the snow, breathing. Bennett looked at Morrow. The dog looked back. There was no forgiveness there, only life spared. That distinction mattered. Creed began laughing then, a thin, broken sound. Not humor, not relief, something tearing loose inside him after being held too long. "Stop!" Bennett snapped. "Amos, stop it!" Creed looked at him, snow crusted in his eyebrows, one cheek scraped red by ice. "You told me it was just to scare him," Creed said. Bennett's face changed. Mara lifted her camera. Callum looked at Creed. "Say it again." Creed stared at Bennett as if seeing him from the outside for the first time. "You said Elias would turn around," Creed whispered. "You said the charge would close the uppercut long enough to make him miss the state filing window. You said nobody would get hurt." "Amos," Bennett said, voice low and lethal. "You are concussed." "No." Creed wiped a shaking hand across his mouth. "No, I remember. I remember the charge went early. I remember the slab breaking wrong. I remember his dog." His voice failed. Morrow's ears lifted. Creed looked at the old shepherd, and whatever remained of his official mask fell away. "I saw him after," Creed said, "at the lower yard, bleeding, dragging that leash piece." Bennett said if the dog turned up, people would ask where he'd been. Said dogs make witnesses out of fools. Bennett tried to sit up. "That is not what happened." Creed rounded on him with sudden fury. "You told me to make him disappear without saying kill him. That's how you always did it." Never said the ugly word. Just left people standing close enough to understand it. Mara kept filming, her face pale behind the camera. Creed's confession poured out in pieces, not clean enough for court by itself, but too true to be unsaid. Bennett had ordered the small charge, Creed had pressured Harlan. North Star Security had tried to capture Morrow. When the dog escaped, they spread warnings that he was dangerous, diseased, unstable. Better a feared dog than a remembered one. Morrow stood very still. Callum wanted to cover the dog's ears, absurd as that was. As if Morrow had not lived every word before men found language for it. A sharp crackle sounded from Mara's radio. She startled, then fumbled it from her coat. "Keen?" A woman's voice came through. Calm. Controlled. "This is Sloan. Confirm location." Mara closed her eyes for one brief second. Then she pressed the button. "St. Oran Auxiliary Station. We have injuries, one partial slide, mechanical firing log recovered, and a recorded statement." Callum looked at her. She met his eyes. "I sent our route before we came up. I'm brave, not stupid." Vera snorted from the snow. Debatable, but appreciated. Within 20 minutes, the first rescue siren rose from the lower road. Rachel Sloan arrived with the state response team, 2 county rescuers who looked grim enough to know better than asking easy questions, and a medical tech carrying a red pack. Rachel was around 50, neat in a Navy parka with a state agency patch on the shoulder. Her dark hair, threaded with silver, was tied low beneath her helmet. She had the kind of face that did not waste sympathy before facts, which made the sympathy, when it came, more trustworthy. She took in the scene in one sweep. Bennett on the ground, Creed shaking, Mara's camera, Vera clutching the log, Callum standing beside Morrow. "Who has the firing record?" Rachel asked. Vera lifted it. "If you drop it, I'll haunt your office." Rachel accepted it with both hands. Noted. She gave it to a technician, then turned to Creed. "Deputy Amos Creed?" Creed looked smaller under her gaze. "Yes. You are going to speak carefully now." He did. Not nobly, not fully, but enough to begin the fall of the wall. Bennett tried to regain shape as they splinted his leg. "You have no idea what this town costs to keep alive," he said to Callum through clenched teeth. "You blow up North Star, and you don't just hurt me. You hurt families. You hurt businesses. You hurt people who never climbed this pass." Callum stood over him, snow melting along the shoulders of his green jacket. "I understand cliffs," he said. "I don't understand pushing a man over one and calling it support." Bennett's eyes hardened. For the first time, he had no polished answer ready. The descent took time. The injured went first. Vera refused a stretcher until Rachel threatened to list her as non-compliant elderly cargo, which produced a string of insults creative enough to warm the entire rescue crew. Creed rode down under guard, his face gray. Bennett was carried with his legs stabilized, still trying to speak in the tone of a man managing a crisis he no longer controlled. Morrow did not follow at once. Callum noticed halfway to the trail. The dog had turned from the group and walked toward the edge of the old slide path. Not far. Just to where the snow fell away toward the hidden cut below Henderson Ridge. "Morrow!" Callum called softly. The dog stopped. Then he sat, straight-backed, silent. Facing the place where Elias had vanished into weather and corporate language and the cowardice of men who knew better, the wind moved through his coat, black over the back, burnished gold at the legs and chest, silver around the muzzle like frost that had decided to stay. Callum walked to him and knelt in the snow. For a moment he wanted to say, "Good boy." The words rose by instinct, familiar and small. But they would not do. Not here. Not for a creature who had carried hunger, fear, memory, and truth across 3 winters. Callum placed his hand on Morrow's back. Beneath the fur, he felt the old dog's breathing, slow and heavy. "He knows," Callum said. Morrow did not look at him. Callum swallowed. "Elias knows you tried." The dog leaned against him then. Not much, just enough to share weight. And that was when Callum felt the sharpest part of his own guilt change shape. It did not disappear, Mercy was not erasure, but it stopped being only his. Morrow had carried a failure too. The failure all loyal creatures invent, when they survive what they could not prevent. Together, kneeling at the edge of the old wound, they let the mountain hear that neither of them had been enough to save Elias, and neither of them had stopped loving him. By the time the convoy returned to Granite Hollow, evening had fallen. The town square glowed with festival lights. Ice sculptures reflected gold and blue and red, beautiful as little gods carved from winter's own bones. People came out of the diner, the hardware store, the church basement, the sidewalks. They had heard sirens. They had seen state vehicles. Small towns were good at pretending not to know things until knowing became unavoidable. No one cheered. No one shouted. The truth did not arrive like victory. It arrived like a bell rung for the dead. Tessa Marlowe stood outside the Blue Antler Diner with a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, her red hair bright beneath the falling snow. Her face changed when she saw Morrow step down from the rescue vehicle beside Callum. Harlan Pike stood farther back, near a lamppost, hat in both hands, body bent by a cough that seemed to come from the cellar of his soul. When Morrow passed, Harlan lowered his head. Morrow paused. For one breath, Callum thought the dog might go to him. He did not. But he did not turn away either. That was all Harlan received. It was not forgiveness. It was not rejection. It was the first inch of a road he would have to walk himself. Mara saw it and lowered her camera. Some things, even a reporter knew, were not for capturing. Rachel Sloan spoke with sheriff's personnel near the edge of the square. Creed was placed in a separate vehicle. Bennett was driven toward the clinic under state supervision. The mechanical firing log disappeared into an evidence case. Around them, Granite Hollow stood in its bright winter costume, suddenly aware that beauty did not absolve a place. Snow kept falling over roofs, over festival banners, over the ice miner holding his frozen lantern in the square. Callum looked down at Morrow. The old dog stood close to his leg, tired but upright, the tin bowl hanging from Callum's pack now because Morrow had finally allowed someone else to carry it for a while. That, more than anything, nearly undid him. A lie could crack in one afternoon. A town took longer. Callum understood that as he watched faces in the square, fearful, angry, ashamed, relieved, not yet honest enough to choose one feeling. Granite Hollow had not been freed. Not exactly. It had been awakened. And like any creature dragged from a long winter sleep, it blinked at the light as if the light itself had done the harm. Morrow leaned once against Callum's knee. Callum rested his hand on the dog's head. "All right," he said quietly. "We brought it back." But the words did not feel like an ending. They felt like the first shovel cutting into frozen ground. 3 weeks after St. Oran Pass broke open, Granite Hollow held a second funeral for a man it had already buried once. No coffin waited this time. No folded flag. No polished speech about unfortunate weather and brave men lost to the mountain. Only a winter morning, a frozen lake, a wooden dock, and the difficult mercy of saying a name correctly after years of letting it stand beside a lie. Snow fell lightly over Morrow Lake, fine and bright, each flake turning slowly through the air as if heaven itself had chosen to speak in whispers. The lake lay sealed beneath a pale skin of ice. Pines gathered along the shore, dark and still, their branches holding snow like old witnesses holding silence. Beyond the trees, Granite Hollow stood with its festival banners still hanging across Main Street, cheerful in color and awkward in meaning, like decorations left up after a house had heard bad news. The town had changed, but not beautifully, not yet. North Star Aggregate's St. Oran project had been suspended pending state and federal review. Trucks that once rolled through town before dawn now sat idle behind chain-link fences. Men who had worn North Star jackets with pride now wore them with their shoulders drawn up, as if the logo had gained weight. Families worried over paychecks. Store owners counted slower days. People spoke in careful phrases at the grocery store, at the diner, outside church. Some blamed Bennett Crow. Some blamed Deputy Amos Creed. Some blamed themselves. A few, quietly and unfairly, blamed Callum Rourke for pulling the rot into the light. Callum accepted that. Truth did not always arrive with applause. Sometimes it came carrying a bill. Bennett had been charged, though his attorneys were already shaping language around him like armor, operational misjudgment, extreme weather, economic pressure, unforeseeable cascade, words clean enough to make a killing sound like paperwork. Creed had given a formal statement in exchange for consideration. That angered people more than Callum expected, not because they wanted justice pure, exactly, but because they wanted guilt simple. Creed had worn a badge in their streets, drunk their coffee, waved traffic past their parades. If he had been a monster, they could have slept easier. But he had been worse than a monster. He had been ordinary. And ordinary cowardice made mirrors dangerous. The memorial was held at the old dock because Mara Keene had found a photograph in her archive of Elias Vance training Morrow there one winter before the fatal season. In the image, Elias stood at the edge of the boards in a slate blue field jacket, one hand lifted in command. Morrow sat before him, young then, broad-chested and sharp-eyed, the lake white behind them. Nothing dramatic, no heroic pose, just a man and a dog in honest weather. So the town came to that place. Not everyone, enough. Tessa Marlowe arrived carrying 2 large thermoses of coffee and a box of plain biscuits wrapped in a towel. Her red hair was tucked beneath a wool hat, and her denim apron was gone, replaced by a brown winter coat and a scarf the color of mustard seed. She moved through the gathering without asking who deserved warmth and who did not. That was her way of repenting. Practical mercy poured hot into paper cups. Vera Holt stood near the dock, railing with one hand on a cane and the other wrapped around a mug. She had refused to sit, claiming chairs encouraged the body to negotiate with weakness. Her steel-gray hair stuck out from under a knit cap, and her safety glasses, unbelievably, still rested on top of her head. "This weather's cold enough to freeze sin if folks would stop keeping it warm in their pockets," she muttered. Mara, standing beside her with a notebook closed in her hands, said, "Can I quote that?" "No. If you quote me, make me sound taller." Dr. Nora Bellamy came last, because an emergency calf had apparently chosen that morning to misunderstand both gravity and fences. She carried a small medical bag and went straight to Morrow without greeting any human first. The old shepherd sat beside Callum's left leg, black and tan coat brushed clean, scarred foreleg steady beneath him, torn ear lifted toward the lake. Nora crouched, checked the wrap she had insisted he still wear for longer walks, then looked him in the eye. "You are too old to become a moral monument," she told him. "Very inconvenient for medicine." Morrow blinked once. Callum said, "That means she likes you." "I don't like anyone before noon," Nora said, standing. "I tolerate him professionally." Morrow's tail moved once against the snow. That small motion did more to loosen Callum's chest than any formal comfort could have. Then Reverend Caleb Wynne stepped onto the dock. He was thinner than Callum expected, a man in his early 60s with a long black coat, a white pastoral stole, soft silver hair, and a short white beard that made his face look both gentle and tired. His hands trembled slightly around a leather-bound Bible, not from the cold alone. Callum had met him only once before, 2 days after the state announced the reopening of Elias's case. Caleb had looked at Callum then and said, "I buried him wrong." No excuse, no sermon to soften it, just that. Now he stood before the town, the frozen lake behind him, and opened the Bible. Tucked inside it was an envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. "I gave the first service for Elias Vance 3 winters ago," Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Perhaps because everyone had come prepared to listen at last. "I stood in a warm room and repeated what I had been told. I spoke of tragedy. I spoke of danger. I spoke of the mountain taking a good man through misjudgment and weather." He paused, eyes dropping to the envelope. "I was not trying to lie, but sometimes a lie does not need our intention. It only needs our cooperation." No one moved. Morrow's ears angled forward. Caleb lifted the envelope. "Elias left this at the church office before he died. He told me, lightly, almost joking, that if anything made the truth complicated, I should read it. When the report came, I believed the report. I told myself the letter was worry, a dead man's caution. I put it inside this Bible and let it sleep there." His fingers tightened. "For that, I am sorry." He opened the letter. The paper crackled in the cold. Caleb read slowly. Elias had not written like a man expecting martyrdom. There was no grand accusation, no demand for vengeance. His words were plain, almost spare. He wrote that St. Oran Pass was unsafe. He wrote that pressure was being placed on people to keep the convoy schedule open. He wrote that if something happened to him, someone should make sure Morrow was not blamed for being hard to handle, because the dog only became difficult when men were hiding something. Then Caleb reached the last lines. "Take care of Morrow if he outlives me. He has carried more truth than most men know how to hold. And remember this, some winter roads do not kill a man with snow. They kill him because someone sees danger and tells others to keep driving." The words moved through the gathered people with no raised voice and no mercy. Tessa lowered her eyes. Harlan Pike stood at the edge of the crowd, hat in both hands, a scarf wrapped high around his mouth. The cold made him cough, but this time he did not leave. He stayed through it, bent and shaking, accepting every word like weather he had earned. Callum felt Morrow lean against his leg, not heavily. "Enough." Caleb folded the letter and looked toward Callum. Callum had not planned to speak. He had been asked. He had refused. Men like him knew how quickly a memorial could become theater if the wrong person stood too long before grief. But when Caleb stepped back, the silence did not close. It opened, and Callum understood that avoiding it would be another kind of cowardice. He walked onto the dock with Morrow beside him. No one clapped. Good. Callum took off his gloves. The cold bit at his fingers at once. He looked over the faces. Tessa with her coffee-stained gloves, Morrow with her notebook pressed to her chest, Vera pretending not to care, Nora watching Morrow instead of him, Harlan barely able to lift his head. He did not look toward the North Star Ridge. Not yet. "Elias once gave his last ration pack to this dog," Callum said. A few people shifted. It was not the opening they expected. "We were a long way from here. Bad place. Worse weather, if you can believe that. I told him the dog could wait until morning." Elias looked at me like I had said something spiritually embarrassing. A small, careful laugh moved through the crowd. Callum let it pass. He said dogs don't understand medals. They don't understand rank. They don't understand the speeches men make afterward to feel clean. Callum looked down at Morrow. They understand who stays when things get bad. Morrow stood still, scarred head high, amber eyes on the lake. "Elias stayed," Callum said. "He stayed with the truth when it became inconvenient. He stayed with this town when it would have been easier to sign a report and look away. And at the end, from what we now know, he tried to get Morrow out before he could get himself out." Callum swallowed. There were words he could have said about guilt, about unanswered calls, about the long road between regret and responsibility. But this morning was not his confession. It was Elias's return. So he reached into the canvas pack at his feet. The tin bowl came out dull and dented, its rim bent, its sides scarred by teeth, weather, and road salt. It looked ugly in the bright snow, poor, small, almost foolish. And yet the crowd changed when they saw it. They knew, not the details maybe, but enough. "This is what Morrow carried when he found me," Callum said. "He was starving, hurt, half frozen, and still he carried the only thing he had left that asked the world to see him." He stepped to the small wooden marker placed beside Elias's memorial plaque and set the bowl beneath it. The bowl rocked once on the boards, then settled. A metal tag had been fixed below the plaque that morning. Vera had helped drill it, complaining about the quality of the screws until everyone felt better. The inscription read, "He came hungry, but he carried the truth." For the first time that morning, sound broke from someone in the crowd. Not a sob. Exactly. More like breath giving up its disguise. Morrow approached the bowl. Callum did not stop him. The old dog lowered his muzzle and touched the dented rim once. Then he sat beside it, straight-backed, silent, not begging now, bearing witness. That was the moment Granite Hollow began to understand. Not fully. Towns did not transform like stage curtains. No light fell from heaven. No choir rose over the frozen lake. People still had mortgages. Lawsuits still waited. North Star's absence would hurt families who had done nothing but work hard under men who made decisions above them. But in that silence around the bowl, some inner agreement shifted. The story was no longer clean enough to hide behind. By late afternoon, the crowd had scattered, leaving footprints across the snow near the dock. Tessa went back to the diner. Caleb returned to the church with Elias's letter now copied and filed. Rachel Sloane, who had stood at the back in a dark wool coat with a thin folder under one arm, spoke briefly with Mara about formal statements and chain of custody. Harlan remained longest, staring at the bowl from a distance until Callum finally walked to him. Harlan's eyes were red from wind and something harsher. "I don't expect him to forgive me," he said. Callum looked back at Morrow. "He's a dog. He doesn't think in courtroom words." "What does he think in?" Callum considered. "Doors," he said. "Hands, food, weather, who came back." Harlan nodded slowly, as if that list had judged him more fairly than any sermon. The weeks that followed did not move like an ending. They moved like work. Rescue Station 6 was reopened first as a temporary equipment site under state supervision. Then, because Vera complained loudly that temporary was the favorite word of cowards and budget committees, it became something more solid. Rachel helped connect Callum with a small grant for winter safety training. Nora offered field care workshops for working dogs and retired canines. Mara wrote the first full Ledger article under her own name and did not take it down when the angry calls came. Tessa brought coffee on the first cleanup day. Vera repaired the old heater by threatening it with retirement. Harlan came early one morning with a snow shovel, said nothing, cleared the front steps until his coughing forced him to sit on the bumper of Callum's Bronco. Morrow watched him from the doorway. After a long while, the dog walked out and sat 10 feet away. Not close. Closer. Harlan cried then, quietly, with both hands over the shovel handle. No one made a ceremony of it. That would have ruined the mercy. Callum stayed. He had not decided in one dramatic moment. He simply stopped making plans to leave. The cabin at Larkwater remained his, but more and more often he slept in the small back room of Station 6, where the repaired stove kept the walls warm and maps lined the office. His olive combat shirt hung by the door when he changed into thermal layers. His old watch rested by the radio at night. The dented bowl sat on a shelf near the entrance, not polished, not repaired, allowed to remain exactly as it had been when hunger carried it to his truck. Morrow took possession of the station gradually, the rug beside the stove first, then the doorway, then the porch. He did not belong to Callum in the simple way people use that word. He belonged with him. There was a difference. Elias remained in the space between them, not as a ghost that chilled the room, but as a name honored often enough to become part of the warmth. One evening, after the first safety class ended and the last volunteer drove down toward town, Callum sat on the porch of Station 6 with a mug of coffee cooling in his hand. Snow fell lightly over the basin. Granite Hollow glowed below, its lights still golden, still beautiful, no longer innocent. Perhaps that was better. Innocence was often just ignorance, wearing white. The town looked wounded now, uncertain and alive. Morrow lay at Callum's feet, silver muzzle resting on his front paws. The old dog watched the mountain. Callum followed his gaze. St. Oran Pass stood dark against the pale sky. "You ready to go in?" Callum asked. Morrow did not move at once. He looked toward the ridge for a long time, toward Elias, toward hunger, toward the place where men had lied and snow had remembered. Then he stood slowly. Bones stiff, dignity intact, he leaned once against Callum's leg, warm and real, and walked with him toward the open door. Inside, the stove waited, maps waited, work waited. Callum rested his hand briefly on Morrow's head. "Home, old man," he said. Morrow stepped into the light. Not to forget the dead. Not to bury what had happened under softer snow, but to guard what Elias had tried to protect: truth, loyalty, and the courage to speak before the mountain has to. Sometimes the truth does not arrive loud. Sometimes it comes hungry, wounded, and carrying an empty bowl to the one door that might finally open. Morrow's journey reminds us that loyalty is not only about staying beside someone when life is easy. It is about carrying what is right through fear, silence, and pain until someone is brave enough to listen. In our own lives, we may not face a frozen mountain or a town afraid to speak, but we all have moments when doing the right thing costs us comfort. And maybe grace begins there, in the small choice to open the door, tell the truth, and stand beside what love has placed in our care. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what part stayed with you. And if you believe in stories of loyalty, courage, and quiet redemption, please subscribe and join us for the next one. May God give you peace, courage, and the wisdom to recognize truth when it comes knocking.